Merciful Lord, patient Father, righteous King, loving in all your ways.
Today, we conclude our series on the Mental Health Friendly Church with a final message in which we focus on the experience of depression. I'd like to offer my own personal story of what it was like for me to experience depression. When I was a young adult, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And I'd like to tell my story today as an encouragement for you if you are experiencing depression or you know somebody who is experiencing depression on any scale. I hope that today my personal testimony can be an encouragement for you. We'll need you to give us your shoelaces. I stared at the nurse for a moment, taking in what she just said, and for the first time that day, I felt something. A sharp, stabbing anger. Anger not towards the nurse, but towards myself, toward the world. That this is what has happened to me. I couldn't be trusted to hold on to my own shoelaces. Of course, it had nothing to do with trust. I was checking into the psychiatric unit of St. Francis Hospital in Colorado Springs. I was voluntarily committing myself to a 4-day hold because my suicidal ideation had nearly turned into my first suicide attempt. And it scared me badly. Giving up my shoelaces was policy and part of the intake procedure. But it symbolized in that moment a surrendering of the final illusion that I could somehow piece myself back together on my own. My stay at St. Francis Hospital was one of many turning points that helped me through an entrenched depression as a young adult. I was 19 years old. My depression began a full year before. This is my story. It's a story of how I experienced full-fledged clinical depression, how it endangered my life, and who the people were who helped me when I needed them. It is also the story of how I experienced a God who loves me and how I became a person of faith through the turmoil. It's also a story about how I sought treatment and how treatment for depression helped me turn the corner and claim my life back. Shortly after my high school graduation, I threw some luggage in my car and headed south to Tucson for a month of competitive karate training. It was my first real experience of being out on my own and away from my family and my home for an extended time. I was filled with bravado and a sense of empowerment. But I did not do well. I was staying in a very small 2-bedroom apartment with 3 other guys. They were all older than me, and I felt very much like the freshman on campus. I got the couch in the front living area. The days became monotonous, with training in the morning and early evening when it was cooler. The temperature hovered about 105 degrees every day that I was there. There was nothing to do in the middle of the day except stay inside, air-conditioned, and rest. I had never had so much physical exercise, and I was not adapting well to being away from home. All my bravado seemed to vanish like water on a hot Tucson sidewalk. So I started to drive my car aimlessly around Tucson after nightfall and talking out loud to myself. I realized that I had no plans for what came next in life. I didn't do well in school, and it was becoming very clear that I was no great athlete or karate champion. Who was I? What was I supposed to do? I didn't have any clear idea. What did become clear was a sense that I was not alone in that car. As I was talking out my distressed and wandering thoughts, it felt like I was speaking to someone sitting right next to me, like my words were being received by some listening ear. It came as a sudden realization to me one night as I was driving around. I looked over at the passenger seat, fully expecting to see some form sitting in it, but nothing. "Are you God?" I asked the empty seat. And in the silent reply, I felt an affirmation. It's hard to describe what that feels like. It wasn't a warm, fuzzy feeling and no soft light began to glow. It was just this sense that I was right about something, like when you checked the key to the crossword puzzle and confirmed that you had the right answer. So, if you are God, then how does this work? Again, silence. It was a small moment at the time, but it grew in significance in the months ahead. I returned home from my month experience in Tucson, and my directionless distress continued. High school had been very stressful for me, and I was glad to be done with the schoolwork. But my friends had all disappeared. They went on with their lives to different colleges or jobs, and I had nothing except a job interview at a law firm downtown. They needed a new office clerk. I was hired, and I was ushered into the workaday adult world. And it was while I was working there that two things happened. First, I started attending church. Second, my brain chemistry started flopping around like a fish out of water. And let me talk about my brain chemistry for a moment. My day would start out just fine, but somewhere in the middle of it, it seemed like someone reached into me and dialed my energy way down. If I were a sunny day, it seemed like I became an overcast drizzler. It would happen in a matter of minutes. This began happening more often, and it was so random. Sometimes I would be fine for days, and then whoop, the inner clouds would roll in. Other times it would happen every single day. Sometimes in the morning, other times in the afternoon. And I didn't realize this had anything to do with my brain chemistry at the time. I was confused and I was distressed by this flip-flopping of my moods. I didn't want to tell anyone about it, so I kept it all to myself. I thought maybe it would just go away, but it didn't. I was preoccupied with how monotonous my life seemed. Every day, go to work, do the same thing. I had no outlet with friends. I would leave work and go home to my parents' house, watch TV, do it all over again. And at the same time, I had been attending church on the weekends, and now I was reading about God in the Bible, learning more about who this God is that I had started talking to. I came across this verse in the Gospels about Jesus. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Unexpectedly, God had stepped into my life that day that He sat down in my car. And I felt lost. I knew I needed direction. And one day, the direction suddenly appeared. My doorbell rang, and there was my childhood friend's mother from down the street. She told me she worked at the community college, and did I have plans for continuing my education? I didn't, I told her. I didn't do well in school. My grades were not good. That's perfect, she told me. There was a program for underachieving and challenged students at the community college, and it was a full scholarship for the first 2 years if I qualified. Would I be interested? I felt the spark of interest. And could it be that God was really doing something? I applied for that scholarship, and I got it. Now I was taking classes, and it felt like I had found the solution. Suddenly I was around other people my age again. But my brain chemistry was still doing its thing. The clouds would roll on in, and I would go from being talkative and engaging to being brooding and pensive. In addition, being around other people my age started making me feel highly anxious. I was keenly conscious of what people thought about me, how they saw me. I felt very insecure. I felt like a sham. Why? Because inside, I felt so empty. I had no idea who I really was. How could I feel this way? It was so strange. I took a personality test as part of my school curriculum, and I freaked out. I did not know how to answer those statements. They tell you on these personality assessments to not think too long about your answers. Just put your first preference down for each statement. I did not know what my first preference was. I was scared that I was going crazy, that I was somehow losing myself. I tried telling my parents about it a couple of times, but I felt like I just couldn't put into words what I was really experiencing. and that made me feel even worse. By now, I was having panic attacks at work, in class, while out shopping or in public. I was constantly on edge about when the darkness would descend. If I felt happy or relaxed, like the sun was shining, I immediately started wondering when it would end, when it would shift, and then I would. I would go with my family on weekend excursions and spend most of the time sullen, with tears of anger welling up in my eyes. I either increasingly felt nothing at all or just angry and irritable. I began thinking about whether I should end my life. How would I do it? Could I really do it? I felt increasingly like I was dragging everyone I was around down, and I just couldn't stop myself from feeling so distressed and lost in this darkness. This is depression. Depression is a physiological state in which your thoughts and moods are intertwined, and you feel like your head is just a massive jumbled up knot. How you are feeling distorts your thoughts, and how you are thinking distorts your moods. You lose all motivation, and you feel like you are just watching yourself move through the world. You know you should care about something, do something, say something, but you just can't. It's like following yourself around as a ghost. Depression is not something that you make up in your head, and it's not something that you can just think or pray your way out of. It is a physiological condition in which your brain chemistry is out of equilibrium. Because I just couldn't think my way out of this, and because it wasn't getting any better with this new relationship I had with God, I thought maybe this life thing just isn't for me. I wasn't telling anyone about the thoughts I was having of ending my life. They scared me. I was shocked by how distressed I was. I was in agony about what it meant. I was tired of seeing people around me feel frustrated and helpless. And I want to say to you listening today that if you are in this place right now, don't keep this to yourself. Tell the first person that you can trust that this is happening. If you trust them, they're not going to be angry with you or run away from you. They will want to help you, and you deserve help. We want you to stay with us. We will do anything we can to help you get the help that you need. No one can take away your depression, but we can give you all the support and the tools to treat it. Depression makes you think you are looking at the end of your story, but it is not true. There is more to your story, and you can experience it. So tell it to somebody. Tell someone what you're experiencing, what you're going through, and let them in. It wasn't until after I almost steered my car off a highway bridge that I finally told my parents what was happening. I told them I needed help, and I didn't know what to do. They took me to St. Francis Hospital, and I stayed at the psychiatric unit for the next 4 days. It was a relief to be in a safe place for a few days, but it was scary at the time. I had all these ideas about what it meant to stay at a mental hospital, and whatever shame I felt dissipated quickly when I joined group sessions and listened to other people talk about their distress, about why they were here in the same place together. And what I heard was a lot of pain and anguish that I could understand, I could resonate with, and I could appreciate. And I also received a lot of education and hope. The staff helped me put together an action plan for when I would leave the hospital. I got started on medication to help even out my brain chemistry. My family and some friends came to visit me, and they showed me that I had their support. So in the midst of feeling powerless, I realized there was a lot of help available to me. The same week of returning home, I started seeing a psychiatrist and a counselor. The psychiatrist talked to me about how I was doing with the medication, and the counselor turned out to be one of the most meaningful people in my life at that time. I can't even remember his name now, but he was the quintessential Rocky Mountain Front Range man. He lived in Manitou Springs, he had hair like Bob Ross, he wore turquoise jewelry, and he had a smoker's raspy voice. He taught me so much about how to sit with my feelings, how to understand anxiety, and how to develop meaning in my life. In many ways, he was like God sitting in the passenger seat of my car. And when I told him about my belief in God, he was supportive and non-judgmental. He encouraged me in my spiritual journey. He reinforced my growing sense of value that I was someone good that God created to love and give purpose to. I spent a year in counseling with this gentle and encouraging counselor. He helped me overcome my panic attacks step by step. It was while attending these therapy sessions that I made concrete plans to transfer to a state university. And it was at that time that I met and started dating Christy, who would become my wife. The depression slowly lost its grip on me as I went through this process of rebuilding and self-discovery. And I found a psalm that became central to my recovery. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I have taken refuge, my shield and the horn of salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. And in my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. And from his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him to his ears. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. I would recite this psalm every day as my mantra. If the cloud of darkness would gather in me again that day, I would keep my focus on God taking hold of me and bringing me out into a spacious place. When I would feel overwhelmed in anxiety and my body succumbing to panic, I would recite these words of God being my fortress, and I knew that he would keep me secure until the panic would pass. I learned that my brain chemistry was changeable and that it wouldn't last forever. I would get to the other side of it, whether it was depression or anxiety. For me, focusing on God being with me while I was going through it gave me a sense of safety and hope. Now, the rest of this psalm focuses quite a bit on God taking vengeance on your enemies. And I certainly saw depression as my enemy at that time in my life. And for a time afterwards, I was so scared that depression would return, I didn't want to feel feelings of sadness. Any kind of down feeling, any kind of melancholy, I was afraid of. I had to learn that I could be sad and feel irritable and have the full range of emotions, both negative and positive, and that this would be okay. It was a process. It was difficult. But I did learn how to become fully emotional once again. Depression has stopped being an enemy for me today, and it's more of a shadow companion. Depression is there to remind me that I need to keep balance in my life, stay well connected with people who love me, and practice safe space with people. I need to continue living life with a purpose and continue taking care of myself physically as much as possible. In the past few years, I have returned to taking medication for depression. It's a different experience than in my younger years. Rather than having such intense days of anguish or loss of feeling, My depression manifests itself in irritability and negative thinking. And I've learned that there are a lot of different types of depression and different ways to treat those types. But it's not something that I'm so scared of anymore. Perhaps that comes from a life now of experiencing God as my faithful companion as I drive down life's road. He has shown me and so many other people in my life that He is there and that He loves each of us more than we could ever know or hope for. But I think most of all, I have experienced a community of people in my life that know me and love me for who I am. And I love them for who they are. We are there for each other. I belong because they let me know that I belong. And that was something I did not have much of in my younger years. So if this is where you are now, wondering where you belong, whether you can be loved for who you are, I pray that you also can turn to the God who is always with you and find that He will lead you through any darkness so that you can be who you are with the people that love you. And I pray that for us as a Safe Harbor Church, we will be the very community that God needs us to be for the people who need it.
Merciful Lord.